The year is 1989, and you've just finished the second part of what you plan to be a trilogy. In a way, this third installment you're about to start is what you've had in mind since the beginning. However, the second part has done something a little weird. Battle Tendency was all about fighting, it's in the name. We learn about the characters and watch them evolve through battle. We learn about Wamu's chivalry and honor through how he chooses to face his opponents. We learn about Stroheim's ideals by how he makes himself into a literal war machine to embody his precious German science. We learn about Kars's selfishness and disregard for the natural order by how he backstabs Lisa and by how he loses to Joseph through sheer carelessness. And most of all, we see Joseph learn to respect others through battle. Hamon, the power system of the series, gets pushed to its limits. Jonathan Joestar trained with Hamon for 2 weeks, my unofficial sources say anyways, while Joseph trained with Hamon for an entire month in what is essentially an organized Hamon academy, as opposed to Will A. Zappelli making do with what he had. Joseph even goes through a final exam which was supposed to be a sparring match with one of his tutors, but ended up a fight to the death with a Pillar Man. Speaking of which, Hamon isn't the only thing pushed to its limits. The Pillar Men, the in-universe predecessors but narrative replacement of vampires, turn vampires into fodder. Seriously, in Part 1 there was one vampire who was treated as a world-ending threat, and the vampire used lowly zombies as henchmen. The Pillar Men, however, use vampires as henchmen, and Joseph defeats a vampire supposedly on par with Dio Brando as a mere warm-up for what is to come. The Pillar Men are to vampires what vampires are to humans, and Joseph, Caesar, Lisa, and Stroheim are pushed to their absolute limits in the battle against them. And as if that weren't enough, even the prestigious title of Pillar Man is left behind as Kars becomes the ultimate life form. Kars is now to the Pillar Men what the Pillar Men were to humans. Anything that any biological life form can do, Kars can do better. Strength, speed, durability, endurance, eternal life, immortality. Kars has it all, and he has it better than anyone else. Even Hamon, the power system that had been previously reserved for humans only, is now accessible to Kars, and now Kars's Hamon makes a mockery of Joseph's Hamon. Joseph, the most battle-tested Hamon user in the series, can't compete against Kars, whose Hamon is, according to him, 1,000 times stronger than Joseph's, and is said to be as hot as the very sun Kars has envied his entire immortal life. It's this very power that is Kars's undoing, as he tries to finish Joseph off with the strongest Hamon attack in the entire series. But that Joseph blocks with a Hamon amplifying artifact that amplifies Kars's already ludicrous Hamon by unknown magnitudes and redirects it into a volcano. This shockwave is so powerful that the volcano erupts, and does so with enough force to send huge pieces of rock and Kars himself inescapably out of Earth's atmosphere. Kars's final attack was so powerful that he unwittingly banished himself from the Earth in a way that even he, the ultimate life form, couldn't undo. His unending thirst for power, his downfall, and his coveted true immortality being his greatest curse. The absolute pinnacle of physical ability. So, the question stands, what are you to do from here? You've sort of played your whole hand here. There's nothing more to explore with the power system. At this point in JoJo's history, there were only really 2 power systems, Hamon and Vampirism, and Kars was the pinnacle of both power systems, and you've unveiled the full potential of how potent and versatile both systems can be with nothing left to explore. So, what do? Well, you change the power system 114 chapters into your story, obviously. That's right, stands. In JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Chapter 114, a brand new power system is introduced and becomes the prominent power system for the series going forward. And I think we forget how bizarre that really is because stands are such an iconic power system. Imagine if in One Piece they did away with devil fruits for good just after leaving Whiskey Peak, or if in episode 27 of Avatar The Last Airbender they just said, actually this whole bending thing is stupid, let's fight with trading cards now. Now, of course, those hypotheticals sound really jarring, whereas JoJo's switch to stands was a smooth transition for most, or so I can assume from reactors I've watched who simply accepted what was being told to them. But why is this the case? Well, like I said, Hamon really had nothing left to offer. The power system had been explored to, frankly, beyond its potential. But is that really all there is to it? Were stands really just so easy to accept because one power system was dried up? Of course not. Stands felt like such a natural expansion of the JoJo's universe because the universe of JoJo's is so soaked in the paranormal and guided by a fascination for mysticism. Hamon and vampirism come from the body, and they both follow a sort of grounded pseudoscience to how they both operate, but they're both still paranormal and beyond explanation. Not only that, but even as early as Part 1, we see other supernatural phenomena, namely fortune-telling, prophecy, and clairvoyance. The world of JoJo's was always set up as a spooky place where the supernatural runs rampant. But more than that, we need to consider what hamon and stands are creatively, and when we think of it in those terms, hamon and stands are the same thing. They are metaphors, hamon being a metaphor, extension, and symbol of bodily control, and stands being a metaphor, extension, and symbol for one's mind and soul. And down the line, there's probably a third symbolic power system that represents something more external. We'll get to that at this rate, we'll get to that in a few years. Hamon was an energy source almost exclusively accessed through the practice of the martial art Sendo, which we see practiced by Asian monks specifically. This is a clear reference to Shaolin monks and their fabled displays of almost superhuman abilities. Hamon is a supernatural extension or symbol of those superhuman feats that, while obtained in reality by a literal lifetime of hard work, often get attributed to some sort of supernatural secret ingredient. Hamon and its corresponding martial art are references to the interesting intersection of spiritualism and body control we find in those particular martial artists. In that same way, stands are a stand-in of, well, any other supernatural ability imaginable, but it was namely a stand-in for the fabled and sought-after power of telekinesis. There was a sort of psychic craze in the 80s, with tons of appearances in popular culture, and also roughly 5 years before Stardust Crusaders, the National Academy of Sciences was requested by the US Army Research Institute to form a scientific panel to look into whether or not telekinesis existed, and if it was viable for military espionage. I'll let you guess what the result was. Basically, psychic powers were all the rage at the time, and Araki, as a lover of the paranormal, supernatural, and spiritual, obviously knew about it, but surprisingly, he wasn't really sold on the whole moving things with your mind thing. My doubt over supernatural powers helped me come up with stands. I doubt such powers like, just think hard enough and things will begin to move. I don't see anything? How can you say your willpower moved things? I wanted something visible that could explain these powers. Stands are proof of those superpowers, basically my way of explaining how these invisible powers work. A quote from Hirohiko Araki himself in JoJo 6251. When you really think about it, Star Platinum, the very first stand we see, even as just an arm, embodies this perfectly. Jotaro is moving things with the power of his mind. The very first demonstration of what a stand can do is when Jotaro used Star Platinum to take this policeman's gun, attempt to shoot himself in the head, and have Star Platinum stop the bullet. Keep in mind, only stand users can see stands, so to the police officers, they can only describe what they saw as telekinesis, which, in a way, is exactly what it was. Basically, while hamon was a symbol and an extension of the fascinating but limited human body, stands were an extension and symbol of the infinitely complex human mind. But just making narrative sense wouldn't be enough to make stands the pop culture icons that they are. They're also an amazingly versatile source of conflict. Stands are a great source of conflict because... what's your question, Derek?
What's a stan?
Shut! Good question, actually. Stands are a manifestation of your mental or spiritual energy and can do just about anything, but the ability tends to reflect the user's mentality or personality in some regard. They also generally follow a set of rules. Only stand users can see other stands, only stands can harm other stands, any damage done to a stand will reflect its user. There are exceptions to these rules, but these rules generally hold true. Another rule that's basically unspoken is the dynamic between power and range. Powerful stands tend to be short-ranged, while weaker stands tend to have a very long range. I've basically just explained the basics of stands in just a short paragraph, but even with these basic rules in conjunction with the fact that stands can do just about anything, conflict in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure quickly became some of the richest and most nuanced out of any body of fiction. To quote Araki, "What I love about stands is that I can express psychological warfare. The stand's physical powers are not what matters most." Because only stand users can see stands, there can be a sort of quiet crisis that wouldn't be possible otherwise, where entire stand battles can erupt and conclude in public with no one noticing. Because of the dynamic between range and power, interesting conflict can be built around closing or creating distance. And because of how versatile stand abilities are and how they can be used without really being noticed, there is a war of information going on a lot of the time. One of the earliest stand battles we see is with a stand in the form of a little supersonic beetle trying to attack the heroes of the story during a flight on an airplane. This sort of invisible battle, a crisis that only the main characters can perceive, would never have been possible before stands, and it also introduced another common layer of psychological warfare, where it isn't always obvious who the stand user is. This beetle stand, Tower of Grey, is insanely fast, so they have trouble attacking it, and if they aren't careful, they'll break the walls and depressurize the cabin, so naturally, they should just beat up the stand user, right? But who is the stand user among all these airplane passengers? They can't figure it out because, turns out, it was this unassuming old man who was playing dumb. It's a meme at this point that the enemy stand user can be anyone, and it's interesting to see this trope introduced so early into the concept of stands. Who is the stand user? What does the stand even do? How do I, with my short distance stand, close the distance to defeat this guy who has a long distance stand? I could easily kill this stand user, but his stand is holding my friend hostage, so I need to play by his rules, but I'm not as good at poker as this guy. One of the most difficult and iconic quote-unquote battles in the series is a freaking poker game. What? Stands are not only great for enhancing combat, but also allow for conflict outside of what would normally be considered a fight. It's fun to watch people try to kill each other, but stands brought a whole new dimension to watching people try to scam, gaslight, extort, or escape from one another, which allows for new and interesting ways to explore characters. Speaking of exploring characters, stands are really good tools for that as well. Because aside from stands like Hermit Purple that are more like accessories, most stands are pretty much a second character design. This means that most stand users get to have two looks and two names that describe their personality and symbolism. Many stands are famously, or perhaps infamously, named after songs, albums, bands, and musicians, and often draw on those names and their rich musical history for their power and symbolism. But back in Part 3, most of the stands were named after tarot cards, and the interesting process of tarot card reading was often vital for the shape and trajectory of the corresponding stand user's character. Either method of naming allowed Araki to say so much about a character without having to actually say it. I don't have the time or wherewithal to do it here, but I suggest that if you're interested in hearing more about stand names and their meanings, you should check out Medi Not the Bad Guy's JoJo essays, where he breaks down the symbolism of the characters' designs, names, and influences. From a character design standpoint, stands have the fascinating ability to express character traits that wouldn't look good together if they had to share only a single character design. Take Muhammad Avdol, for instance, who is a fortune teller and mentor figure for the Stardust Crusaders. He has a very calm outward demeanor with an air of sophistication, and his baggy robes, at least to me, gives him a softer appearance. Despite that, his stand, Magician's Red, has the ability to create and control fire, something referred to repeatedly as a primordial force by other characters. Because of this, Magician's Red takes the appearance of a naked, flaming birdman. In many ways, Magician's Red is the opposite of Avdol in appearance. Animalistic, kind of ugly, and always spreading out its body in a sort of primal fury, perhaps speaking to an internal burning passion that Avdol keeps on the down low. You'd be hard-pressed to express Avdol's wisdom and calming presence at the same time as his burning passion and primal power in just one character design, but thanks to his stand, we have two canvases to work on to describe one character. Another example of this is Jean-Pierre Polnareff. He is on a mission to avenge the violation and death of his little sister, and this mission has caused him to travel all around the world. He dresses fairly simply with very few accessories, and he carries his luggage in a simple sack tied with a rope. This is a symbol of the single-minded pursuit he has for his mission. However, his stand, Silver Chariot, has the appearance of an armored knight, a symbol of Polnareff's martial power, chivalry, and steadfast sense of duty. In many ways, the two character designs are opposite, but also visually complementary, and come together to paint the full picture of who he is. Now, stand designs don't always need to be the opposite of the stand user, but my point is that it can express things about the user that can't be expressed very easily on the outside. Like with Hierophant Green, Kakyoin's stand. Kakyoin is Jotaro's first real opponent, even if by mind control, and there's a clear-cut dichotomy between them, because while Jotaro's Star Platinum has a very human face and body and confidently roars out a battle cry every time it attacks, Kakyoin's stand has these lens-like eyes and what looks like a rebreather for a mask. Its body often comes undone into tendrils, and it's repeatedly described as a quiet stand that prefers to hide away. This not only betrays Kakyoin's fighting style as a strategist less focused on brute force, but it also gives off a weirdly alien vibe, which plays nicely with what we learn about Kakyoin's lonely childhood later on. This extra layer of character expression was perhaps more important than ever going into Part 3, because JoJo's protagonists become more deceptive with each installment, whether it be Josuke's status as a Yankee, Giorno's heritage, Jolene's lot as a criminal, or the morally gray areas explored thereafter. However, Jotaro, Part 3's protagonist, is the most famous for keeping a lot of his cards to his chest, so introducing a way to express who a character is on the inside was a much-needed addition, though the way Jotaro keeps his cards to his chest and goes on his silent journey is a discussion for next time. So, what can be said about stands? Well, not much that hasn't already been said. They're just great. They're Araki's unique way of visualizing all sorts of intangible powers and concepts while opening new opportunities on so many levels. The fact that one power system can not only enrich the character's symbolism and entertainment value, but also interlock all of these facets of the story in an immaculate chain is something we can't take for granted. It has been hugely influential on manga and storytelling in general going forward. Not to mention, stands just look freaking fantastic, drawing visual inspiration from all sorts of sources like folklore, high art, fashion, 80s pop culture, all while being rendered with enough technical skill to warrant being featured in the Louvre. Stands were the perfect follow-up power system, not an emergency replacement for Hamon, but the rightful successor in so many ways, and to this day, stands are both a vehicle for and a representative of just how broad and deep JoJo's Bizarre Adventure can be. That's going to do it for this lecture, and if you enjoyed it, I recommend you check out some of my other JoJo video essays, linked in the description below or in the eventual end screen. I also have a playlist of supplemental materials that sort of back up what I had to say this lecture and are from channels I generally really like. Of course, if you're interested in my other ramblings, you can subscribe to see more, and if you want to support the channel, you can join my Patreon for early access, bonus content, and even be credited at the end of my videos. Well, my voice is getting tired and I have to pee, and that means class is dismissed.